Hi, my name is Chastity McKissick. I'm the project-based learning coordinator as well as the math support. So today we're going to do an instructional video on concrete representational abstract with comparing fractions. Okay, so as I said, we're going to address comparing fractions using the CRA approach, concrete representational to abstract. So in front of us, we have an abstract word problem. It has words and numbers and a task for the students to accomplish. So what we're going to do again is start with using concrete objects of fraction bars. So first we're going to use the one whole as a reference so students understand that fractions are less than one whole. So taking the problem that we have, Amy jogged 1/4 mile. So we're going to use a 1/4 fraction to represent Amy's length or distance that she jogged. Then we have Jordan jogged 3/4 of a mile. So we're going to use 3/4 to represent Jordan's distance. And then finally, Tara jogged 3/8. So we're going to use 3 of the 1/8 fraction bars to represent Tara's distance. So as students are able to visualize and as well as get a concrete representation of the distance that each runner jogged. So to answer the question concretely, who jogged the furthest distance? Well, if we compared Amy, Jordan, and Tara, we can see that Jordan actually has the most amount, so therefore Jordan ran the longest distance. Okay, so now we're going to switch over into another concrete representation. We're going to use fraction discs to represent the exact same problem. So Amy, again, let's begin. We have our one whole as our reference to understand that fractions are less than one whole. So Amy jogged 1/4 of a mile. So I can have the students use a fraction disc and take away the parts that are not needed. So therefore, Amy represents her 1/4. Jordan jogged 3/4 of a mile. And Tara jogged 3/8 of a mile. So then I would have the students use 3 of the 8 fraction discs. So if I were to look at the comparison of the fraction disc parts, I would see Amy has the 1/4, Jordan has the 3/4, and Tara has the 3/8. Looking at the amount, we also see that Jordan is the runner with the longest distance ran. Okay, so we represented using the fraction bars and fraction discs. So students can either represent them in either way, with fraction bars or discs. For my particular model, I'm going to use a fraction bar. As stated earlier, it is always important for students to have a reference of a whole. So here is my one whole. Now underneath my one whole, I'm going to create a fraction bar of fourths. We know that in the middle is 1/2, and you divide a half to get your 1/4. And I'm also encouraging the students to label the fractional parts. So if I were to continue representing each amount from the problem, I'm going to also draw another set of fourths to represent Jordan's distance. So 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, and 1/4. Another option is to have the students add each fractional part to equal one whole. For instance, 1/4 plus another 1/4 will equal 2/4. Another 1/4 will equal 3/4. And another 1/4 will equal 4/4, which is equal to your whole. And lastly, we're going to represent Tara's distance. Again, with fractions, we know with 1/2, and then from a half, they can divide it into fourths. And from a fourth, they can divide it into eighths. 2, 4, 6, and 8. And also label 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8. Okay, so at this point, we want the students to shade the amounts. Amy jogged 1/4. I'm going to label Amy and shade in Amy's amount of 1/4. Jordan jogged 3/4 mile. So I'm going to label Jordan and shade in 3/4. 1, 2, and 3. Finally, Tara jogged 3/8. I'm going to label for Tara and shade in 3/8. 1, 2, and 3. So from the visual representation, who jogged the furthest distance, students can also see that Jordan is the student that jogged the furthest distance. In closing, this model represented how to compare fractions utilizing the concrete representational to abstract approach. I encourage teachers to implement the CRA model, again, concrete representational to abstract, with every concept that you're teaching in your class. This helps students to be able to retention of the concept and be able to build on their understanding as they relate future concepts to their learning. Thank you.
Now that you know what it's about, go and test it on out. Don't keep your head in the clouds. If you got questions, speak out. We got answers for the questions, learning them a blessing. Take this all to heart, knowledge makes you become legend.
Can I get a 1 to the 2 to the 3 to the 5? Hey, can I get a 1 to the 2?